Welcome back to IMPAS Consulting, where you'll find information on workers' compensation matters. In recent videos, I've focused on return to work, which is a key part of any workers' compensation scheme. But legislation is another key part. So I'm putting together this series of videos to deal with legislation in the New South Wales scheme. Now I should disclose that I don't have a legal background, but in a previous life I've spent considerable time working at a case manager level, and case managers deal with legislation on a daily basis, and I continue to use the legislation in my current role as lead consultant of IMPAS Consulting. So this is not legal advice, but I will be pulling apart the legislation to deal with what I see as the relevant sections from my experience. As I say, the sections that case managers and others use on a daily basis. Now there are two key pieces of legislation in the New South Wales scheme. One is the Workplace Injury Management Act, otherwise known as the WIM, and the second one is the Workers Compensation Act 1987, otherwise known as the Act. Now the WIM has over 300 sections alone, and the Act has almost 300 sections. So the legislation is vast, and obviously we're not going to cover all of those sections in this series of videos. But as I said, I will pull out the most relevant ones from my experience and deal with those as we go through. Now, I'm going to start with the Act, the Workers' Compensation Act 1987 in this first video, and start with Part 1. Now, Part 1 has 9 active sections, but I'm only going to deal with 2 in this video. Now, the first of those is Section 2A. Now, Section 2A deals with the relationship between the Act and the WIM. Now, what this says is that where there are any inconsistencies between the two Acts, because at times they do interact, then the WIM prevails. Okay, but in a general sense, just to add to that, and this particular part of the section doesn't go into this so much, or at all, I should say, but to speak in general terms, you can say that the Act deals with liability and entitlements, while the WIM more so deals with stakeholder obligations and compliance issues. Now that's painting it with a very broad brush. As I say, they do interact with each other, but the important thing to remember is the WIM prevails over the Act if there are any inconsistencies. Now the second section I wanted to talk about is Section 4, and this is the definition of injury. Now this section says that for a compensable injury, the injury needs to arise out of or in the course of employment. It doesn't go into any more detail than that. There are other references in this section to the employer needing to be the main contributing factor for a disease injury, such as a degenerative disease, for example. But that's the sum of it. A compensable injury is an injury arising out of or in the course of employment. So that summarises this part of the Act, Part 1 of the Act. In the next video we'll be moving to Part 2, which deals with liability. And this section, or this part, will be split into several videos, as it is quite a comprehensive and broad-reaching part of the Act. So if you want to be kept up to date with these videos, then if you are watching on YouTube, then please subscribe. Like or share if you're watching on other social media platforms. But in the meantime, work safe.